Okay, can you see the PPT on your screen?
Yes, Father.
Thank you, Bharat. Okay, I have identified a few topics and themes for this novel, which I suppose, we have read and we discussed it last time, chapter by chapter, and you know how gripping it is and how well written it is. So it is an important text in Indian English literature, and it has some themes that I think we should be familiar with. But just to refresh your memory, please note that the novel was written in 1956 and published in 1958. It's, of course, genre is fiction. You may call it realist fiction. And setting is this fictional place called Malgudi that Narayan created for his fiction, for his short stories and novels. Almost all of his stories and plots are set in Malgudi, a place in South India, Tamil Nadu. Okay, and the story is about Raju, who becomes known as Railway Raju and then goes on to become a guide and then a Swami, a guru, um, um, that takes him to a critical point in his life. Okay, it's from about point of view, we can say that it's a third person narrative as well as first person narrative, because while there is a third person omniscient narrator in the text, a lot of narration is done by Raju himself in the first person, especially the flashbacks, the reminiscences of the past. Okay, some of the themes that I have identified are the title itself, whether it's apt, it's not apt, it does justice to the text or it does not. Those are some of the questions we can think about. And then there is duplicity and disguise, and I have added the word deceit also to it. What role does deceit, duplicity, and disguise play in the novel, in Raju's life in particular? Then there is a theme of transformation. Raju keeps changing disguises, keeps changing professions. So, does it bring about a kind of transformation in him? And if yes, what sort of transformation? And when exactly does it happen? When exactly does it become full? Okay. And then we have materialism versus spirituality. There's a lot of material quest. There is greed. There is a want for more. And then you also see a quest for spirituality, a quest for inner peace and for faith and for spiritual guidance and a reliance on spirituality, at least among the villagers and in Raju himself in the end. So that is a theme. And feminism, especially as portrayed to Rosie. Narayan makes a strong statement about feminism, about women's place in independent India. And so we have feminism as one of the themes of the novel. Okay, and please note that while you are not going to write any essay type questions this year in the exams, you can certainly think of writing a paper on this novel as part of your formation in literature as scholars. Okay, so we'll go to the first topic. I will be sharing some thoughts with you, and you may interrupt me if you need to. but I have one final question that will be open to you all at the end. Title. Okay, what are the different connotations of the word guide in the novel? Because the title of the novel is The Guide. So Raju is a guide in the professional sense, that he is a guide to the people, the tourists especially who came to Malgudi, and he realizes that that was more interesting and more lucrative than minding the shop at the railway station. So that's one connotation of the word guide. Uh, then he becomes a manager to Rosie, and he guides her career, and he guides her profession, and he guides even her performances. So in that case, he's a guide as Rosie's manager. And then in the final stage of his life, he is a Swami, he is a guru, so he guides people spiritually. So at least these three different connotations of the word guide appear in the text. So that's those are the three different meanings we have. Now, the other meaning is that of guide in the material sense of the word, that somebody who guides other for material gains or for his own material prosperity, or somebody who guides himself to some material benefits, some material advantage, as guide, as Raju the guide does, as Raju the manager does, as Raju the shopkeeper does. You know, he's very opportunistic, and he always guides himself to the right place, being right place at the right time to get material benefits. So that's one more connotation. And the other final other connotation is that guide in a spiritual, a transcendental sense, a metaphysical sense, wherein you guide people to what really matters in life: happiness, peace, faith, or spirituality. And in that sense, you lead people to some kind of fulfillment in life, some kind of nirvana, moksha, or liberation, if you like. And in that sense, you become a guru, one who guides people beyond materiality, beyond the concerns of this earthly life, and into the realm of spirituality. So that is also a kind of an implicit meaning of the word guide. So we have all this meaning combined into the text and embodied by Raju. Does Raju live up to his role as a guide? A tricky question, because if you think of the point of view of Raju, the guide as a professional guide, or Raju, the guide who guided people to at the railway station, or Raju, who was Rosie's guide, to a great extent, yes, he lives up to his role. He is known to be a very people-oriented, very friendly, and very outgoing and expert at his job. He was not a trained guide, but he realized his talent for dealing with people and making up things, and giving people, offering people what they were looking for. You know, we have come across a comment wherein Raju says that one thing he noticed is that no two people are interested in the same thing. So he used to pick up these things, who is interested in what, and exactly serve them that, or take them to what they desire. So he was, of course, a good guide, and he lived up to his role as a guide to almost 2/3 of the novel. But then he became greedy, and he began desiring more, and it's at that point in life that he begins to fail as a guide, at least in the case of Rosie. He doesn't allow Rosie to, I mean, he cheats, he's caught in that forgery case, and then he's not a good guide. He had guided Rosie out of the mess that she had got into with Marco. He had guided Rosie to begin a career that she was dreaming of, but that's it. Later on, he fails as her guide and ends up in jail. As far as Raju, the Swami, is concerned, it's difficult to say whether he lived up to his role or not, because the ending is ambiguous, and that's where I would rely on your help, on your perspectives on the things, whether Raju fulfilled his role as a guide to the people or not. He was not a Swami in a genuine sense. He did not want to become a guide to the people. The role was thrust upon him by villain and other villagers, and it was out of necessities and out of circumstances that he had become a guide to them. So does he live up to that role? Well, yes and no. Yes, because he does begin fasting, and yes, because he carries on fasting, and in the end, it appears that there is salvation, people's faith is rewarded, and the rains arrive. And no, because he was not a Swami, actually, he was a fraud. He was kind of a con artist, and he was taking people for a ride. Even the whole fasting event, he did not want to fast. It was a misinterpretation on the part of villain's brother, and he could not get out of it, and he had nowhere to go. So he does not live up to his role, especially if the rains did not arrive. He does not live up to his role as a guide. He disappoints people both materially as well as spiritually. So it depends on us as to what stand we want to take. And that's the beauty of this novel, that it leaves the end ambiguous, open-ended. You could take either stand depending on how you analyze or understand Raju's role as guide. Is the title apt? Yes, I would say, because like Pride and Prejudice, not everybody in the, just as not everybody in the text Pride and Prejudice was proud or prejudiced, but the protagonists were, and it was their pride and their prejudice that was driving the plot and had a very decisive impact on the other actions in the text. Guide, Raju's role as a guide is very, very decisive, because if he was not a guide, he would not have met Rosie and Marco. He would not have even noticed their arrival in Malgudi. But he is a guide. He becomes a guide and meets Rosie and liberates Rosie and guides her career and puts her on the path to self-fulfillment. As well as in the end, he becomes a guide to the people in a spiritual sense, and probably he becomes a guide to himself. He realizes how he has been living a duplicitous life, a life of disguise and deceit, and a life of lies, and a life of performances. And at one point, he guides himself out of it by wanting to fast and by wanting to earnestly pray for people and become a Swami in the real sense, a Swami who would guide people to happiness and spiritual peace and liberation by sacrificing his own life. So if that happened, and if we assume that that happened, then Raju became a true guide to himself in the end, let alone the others. And in that sense, the title guide is very, very apt, because without Raju's role as a guide, the novel doesn't have the same force. It doesn't have the same interest, and it doesn't have the same finale as we have with Raju as guide. So I would say yes, the title is apt. And you are most welcome to differ, but you will have to have your reasons for saying that no, it's not an apt title. Unfortunately, you will not have that chance to argue because you will not have assignment and viva. But all the same, it's important to think about it. The other theme, as I said, is deceit, duplicity, and disguise, the three Ds that define Raju. Raju was a master of deceit. He could take people for a ride through his words, through his actions, and through his plans. So he was a person who had excelled at deceiving others. There was duplicity about him. He always tried to put on mask. He had a facade, and he did not appear to be who he really was, but was just being a duplicate uh, of himself, not really showing his real self. He just assumed roles as and when required, and when the role had fulfilled its end, he would just discard it and assume another role to suit another situation and take advantage of that time and place. So he was very duplicitous. And he was always in disguise. He had one role, then next, then next, then next, and he kept on uh, adapting himself to the new realities and new times so as to carrying on deceiving people through his disguises. So, how duplicity and disguise drive the plot? Well, it's obvious that in the case of Raju, it was only duplicity and disguise that take him from one place to another, that excite him and that drive the story. So he was not a shopkeeper, but he tried to be a shopkeeper. He was not someone interested in magazines, but he also learned the art of being interested in magazines. And then he was not a guide, but he trained himself to speak to people and to serve them what they wanted. And then he disguised himself as a guide, and he bluffed people. He took them for a ride, and he excelled at exaggerating, at making up stories as a guide. So, of course, that was a disguise because he was bored of life at the railway station, and he thought, just spending time with people and making money out of it and going around on rides with them was a lot more fun. So that's what he did. He put on that disguise quite well, although he had no training in working as a guide. Then he also again disguises himself as Rose's manager because that was not his main interest to further Rose's career or to liberate her. His main intention was to continue being in relationship with her and then to use her talents to make a lot of money for himself. And he succeeds initially at both. He manages to live with Rosie as husband and wife, and she moves in with him, and she begins a career as dancer, all because of Raju's successful disguise as her manager. Although we know that he even takes advantage of that position. So, but the disguise works quite well for a long time. What is the difference between Raju's other disguises and his disguise as a Swami? The other disguises were under Raju's control. Raju could wear them, put them on, and discard them, take them off as he wanted. He did not want to study, so he became a shopkeeper. He did not like his old shop, so he took up the new shop. He did not like only selling, so he started selling magazines. Then he was not satisfied with it, so he could become a guide. Then he could become a manager. Uh, and so he had control over those disguises. Nobody knew who real Raju was. And the difference between his disguise as a Swami is that Raju had no control over it. It was the other people, it was the circumstances that had imposed that role of Swami on him. And that is the reason that while Raju could discard the other disguises and take on new roles, he cannot discard the role of Swami. That disguise stays with him and stays with him so powerfully that probably in the end he pays for it with his life. He had to, he could not wriggle out of that disguise. People so strongly saw a Swami in him, and he put on an act so realistically that that disguise became himself. In the end, even Raju forgot that he was just putting on a show, that he was a sadhu in disguise, not in a real sense. So even when he tries to shake it off by confessing his real life, his past life, and his penchant for duplicity, it doesn't work, because that disguise has now completely transformed him into a spiritual man, a Swami in whom people have placed a lot of faith. And that is the difference between Raju's other disguises that were driven by deceit and duplicity, and his disguise as a Swami that was driven by circumstances and people's will and faith in him. Question 3. How Raju's deceit, duplicity, and disguise impact his life? In a very big way. They launch Raju into the orbit. They make him very successful, and the same things bring him down, crashing to the earth, and probably claim his life. So it is deceit and disguise and duplicity that see an upward graph for Raju from the beginning, even from the days he gives up school and begins to mind the shop. He just rises, he prospers, and he becomes more and more and more successful with whatever he takes up, minding the shop, acting as a guide, acting as manager. He just rises, he is successful, and he not only is successful with material things, with money and fame and prosperity, but also with love interest. He manages to snatch Rosie out of Marco's hands, so much so that she becomes his wife. They have a live-in relationship. And so he is successful because Rosie thinks that Rosie believes Raju for his words and for her flattery, for his flattery of her. Rosie takes him to be a good man, a man who was deeply interested in her and was in love with her. So that works. That works to a great extent, and it impacts Raju's life a great deal. He thinks he was doing the right thing and he was getting the right results out of it, and everything was falling in place and working quite well for him, no matter how it impacted others' lives. So we know that Raju's duplicity and disguises impacted his mother very badly, his finances very badly, Marco Polo very badly. Even Gafoor feels a bit let down by him. He doesn't care. So while others' lives were being impacted, if we concentrate only on Raju's life, it was impacted both positively and negatively. Positively up to a limit when he hits the height, and then he has his downfall and downward slide. From the time he tries to forge Rose's signature and ends up in jail, the disguise begins to impact him negatively. And then we see a kind of an upward graph in a little before the end, wherein we can see that the villagers take him to be a real sadhu, and that impacts his life positively. Again, he's able to pick up the scraps and put his life back on track to some extent in a new role as Swami. But when it really matters, when people wanted him to work his spiritual power and influence the gods and bring down the rain and save the villagers, maybe the disguise is exposed and it proves hollow, and it impacts him in such a way that he loses his life. He has to pay for it with his life. He has to sacrifice his life because the disguise doesn't work when it really matters. It worked to a great extent with material things and with where words are needed, it worked. But where action was needed, and not only an ordinary action, but a miraculous action that we expect from holy people, from swamis, the disguise did not work, apparently, because he sags, he falls down while he's imagining that the rains are arriving. So if we take that to stand, then the disguise has a negative impact on his life at the end. So it seems to be taking him towards prosperity and happiness and a big rise to stardom in life, but it does not work in the end. Transformation. Transformation, as you know, is going from one point to another point, making a progress, making a change, undergoing a kind of change in life. Transformation, you transform yourself or you transform something else. So what are the kinds of transformation that take place in the text, especially as far as Raju is concerned? Is there a gradual transformation of Raju in the text? Yes, to a great extent. Raju keeps transforming himself in a very superficial sense. So he transforms himself first into a good student, although he was not a good student. And then he transforms himself into a good shopkeeper, although he had no inclination to mind the shop. Then he transforms himself into a guide, although he had no training as a guide and he was not qualified as a guide. And then he transforms himself as Rose's manager, although that was he did not have good motives to be Rose's manager. And then he transforms himself into a Swami, a sadhu, although that was not what he wanted. So there is a transformation. And that transformation takes place irrespective of Raju's limitations to do it, or Raju's inability to handle it, or Raju's unwillingness to embrace it. There is transformation. Throughout the text, there is transformation. And we can chart it, we can see it. So how does each transforming experience shape his personality? He had a well-integrated, at least a very street smart personality. He knew exactly when to say what and when to act at the right time. so that he stands to gain from any situation. So he had that kind of a personality of a shopkeeper's son who had to thrive in business or survive in business or take advantage of the circumstances around him. But each time he transforms himself, something changes in him. So when from student he transformed himself into a shopkeeper, he became more confident of things, more confident about talking to people, about selling things, about handling the customers. And then when he became a guide, he realized that it was even easier for him to take people for a ride and to detect the personality traits of different people, read people's minds and faces, and take advantage of it. And that made him more self-confident and more greedy about things. So if you talk about what difference it makes in his personality, every transforming experience made him more self-confident and also more greedy about things. So then when he becomes Rose's manager, he realizes that it was even more fun. He had the woman by himself and he had all her money uh, all for himself. And it was great life to have. So he becomes a manager who then gets used to living lavishly, and he adds that kind of extravaganza to his personality, uh, which he did not have earlier. He was a man of small means, and even when he was spending a lot of time with Marco and Rosie, he realized that his business was suffering, his house was in danger, and his relations were getting affected. But when he becomes the manager, he realizes that all of that was not needed, and he adds that aspect of lavishness to his life and to his personality, and also that false sense of self-confidence leads him to forge Rose's signature and to commit that forgery that ultimately brings about his downfall. Then his experience of transforming himself into a sadhu adds that kind of reflectiveness to his nature. He becomes more philosophical about life. He becomes more regretful of his past life. He becomes more brooding, in the sense that he knew that he was putting on a show and people were being misled by it, and that was not the right way of doing things. It was not morally and ethically acceptable for him to play with people's feelings, people's faith, and people's means. So that is another aspect of his personality: self-reflection, and very self-reflection to the extent of self-realization that happens in his personality as Swami. It is only when he becomes a Swami he begins to question himself, saying that, am I practicing what I preach? I say a lot of wise things to people, and I demand a lot of good behavior from them. But what about me? Do I have it? I am a fraud. I'm actually I am a con artist. And that is an aspect of his personality that we see in the end. How often he feels like calling the bluff, and then putting up his hand and sticking out his neck and say, enough is enough, and I'm a fraud, and please send me out of here or do with me whatever you want. I'm not a Swami. So that's the kind of personality change that we see. And the authenticity, the genuineness that he shows in fasting, that when people want him to fast and people take it very seriously, he takes it seriously. He says, okay, let's not fool around anymore, and let me pray, and let me pray sincerely. If people think I am a sadhu, I am a swami, let me be one. And even if that costs my life, so be it. At least I will die at peace with myself. So that is something that we never saw, a kind of seeing his face in the mirror, facing the truth, and being really genuine in the end. That is the kind of transformation that happens to Raju in the guide. Where does Raju arrive after a complete transformation in life? We can say that he arrived at self-realization. We can say that he arrived at self-fulfillment, knowing that all his life he had been deceiving people and therefore he had to perpetuate lies. When he comes to a self-realization that all that was useless, meaningless, and ultimately dissatisfying and sinful, he comes clean about it, and he accepts his role as Swami, and therefore he has that sense of self-fulfillment and a sense of peace with himself. So that's where he arrives at the end in life, that no matter, even if I have to die, I will die peacefully. Even if and if the rains come, then I would be a real Swami, and then I don't want to take on any more disguise, any more role. I don't want to put up with any more lies, and I will be who I am, because that is something that I can fully identify myself with, and that is something that is that suits me the best, probably the role of a real sadhu, life of a real Swami. And that's where he arrives. He arrives at the moment of truth, at the moment of realization, and at the moment of liberation. Even if he lost his life, he lost it happily, peacefully, at least lost it knowing that he had to pay for all the lies and disguise and deceits that he had practiced, so that there is some sort of reparation in life, some making up for his life of duplicity and disguises. So I would say he arrives at that spiritual awakening in the end. This next is a very interesting theme or topic: materialism versus spirituality. We see a lot of materiality driving the plot, a lot of materialism, concern with money, concern with career, concern with relationships, concern with law and order, concern with day-to-day life, concern with people's needs in life. And at the same time, we see a strong dose of spirituality, wherein people also need God, people also need faith, people also need philosophy, and people also need the supernatural, to the extent that even for material needs, they turn to spirituality. So in Raju's case, it was materialism that was driving his life. He was not satisfied as a shopkeeper, so he becomes a guide. He was not satisfied as a guide, so he becomes a manager. He was not satisfied with the money and fame and luxuries that came his way as a manager, so he tries for more, and it misfires, and he ends up in jail. So it was a pursuit of material things, material happiness, material prosperity, and material progress that ultimately undoes whatever Raju was trying to do, and it brings about his ruin in the end. So that's materialism, and we see a lot of materialism driving the plot even otherwise also. In the case of Raju's father, he was all about his shop, did not care for his wife and his son. And Gafur also was a very honest, hardworking man, but his concern was only earning his living in life and doing his work, and that's all. The villagers also, to a great part, they were busy with their lives and their businesses and their daily farming and their rituals and their celebrations, all that. Very at the existence in Guide is, in general, at a very material level, and most of us live at a material level most of the time. However, that is not to say that there is no spirituality. There is spirituality that especially we see in people who villain. Now, villain's main why villain in the first place strikes a relationship, a conversation with Raju is because he had a material problem. He had a social issue with his sister, and that's how he turns to spirituality. So we see that although people's concerns remain material, they look for spiritual solutions, and they turn to spirituality and spiritual power and divine intervention and the supernatural for their answers to their material questions or questions related to their material lives. But we see that when Raju had to choose between materiality and spirituality, in the end, probably if we take it positively, he chose spirituality over materiality. Probably also because he realized that material things in themselves cannot satisfy you. Whatever material things he had tried had left him high and dry and had left him wanting more and more and more. And they had not left him to led him to real happiness, neither making money as guide, nor sleeping with someone else's wife, nor prospering as manager, nor spending time in jail as somebody's right hand man. Nothing had worked for him. All that had left him very dissatisfied with himself and very frustrated and angry with the world around him. But when he came in touch with spirituality, although inadvertently, he found that that had a meaning in itself. There was something in spirituality that touched a deep chord in him. And when he saw people's innocent and simple faith in him, and when he saw people's longing for spiritual food and for spiritual guidance and for the intervention of the supernatural in life, he was transformed. So definitely Raju chooses spirituality over materiality in the end, and which maybe leads him to some kind of an enlightenment or fulfillment in the end. And that's the answer to the third question also, that Raju finds fulfillment by totally embracing spirituality. He had to completely let go of material attachments and material means and material longings. When he gave up all those three, then he became a spiritual man, and with spirituality he found fulfillment. So when he let go of material things, he realized that he could live without them, and that the vacuum that giving up material things left in him was filled by spiritual realities that he embraced in the end. Feminism. Rosie is the character that represents feminism in the text. How does Rosie feel about the treatment given to her by both Marco and Raju? She feels bad about it to begin with. She was very upset with Marco because Marco had married her not out of love, but just out of his own needs. He wanted someone to take care of him while he pursued his intellectual interest in archaeology. And so a rich man wanted a wife who would also double up as a servant and take care of him, and also as a kind of a showpiece who would go around with him, and they would live as a couple. And Rosie did not like it, although she came from a poor background and was a dancer by profession. She did not like the treatment that Marco meted out to her. There was a clear dissatisfaction in the way Marco treats Rosie, and Rosie lets that know. Rosie expresses and shares about it with Raju. So she was not happy with the treatment of Marco. And Marco represents a very patriarchal world, a man with money, a man who is interested in himself, and a man who thinks that he has total control over his wife. So very coming from a very patriarchal society and patriarchal mindset. And Raju was no better. Raju fell in love with Rosie, more with her beauty than with her personality. And he, in fact, begins a relationship with her behind her husband's back. And when he becomes her manager, he begins to desire more control over her. So when Rosie invites friends and fellow artists to meet her, he doesn't like it, and he begins to resent it, and he begins to have fights with Rosie. And that's a very, very patriarchal attitude of a man wanting to have total control over with his partner, and not wanting her to express herself and find fulfillment and freedom away from him. That's what Rosie wanted. Rosie wanted to be a dancer. Rosie wanted to be an independent professional. Rosie wanted to make a career, build her career on her own. But Raju was not ready for it, and he thought that being a man, he had to guide Rosie, and being a man, he had to take control of her affairs, and being a man, he had to make sure that she remains dependent on him. And that's what Rosie feels. And after he goes to the jail for the first 2 days, I think Rosie's attitude to him changes, because she realizes that he should not be allowed to call the shots anymore. It would be she who would take control of her own life. So that's what she feels hurt, she feels let down, and she feels exploited by both Marco and Raju. When and where and when does Rosie find true freedom and realization of her full potential in the text? In two places. First is when Marco walks out of her life, when he walks out on her. At one fine day, Marco just boards a train from Malgudi and just walks away. And when Rosie shows up at the railway station, he tells her bluntly that I don't have a ticket for you. Go wherever you want. And that's when, abandoned by her husband and having nowhere to go, she finds her freedom. She picks up her bag, turns around, and shows up at Raju's place and moves in with him. That's when she realizes that as an educated girl, as a woman with talent, and as a woman with freedom, she could carve a niche for herself. She could build her own career, and she could find her own happiness away from her husband. That's the first place when it happens. And then she starts practicing dance, and then she gives her first performance, of course, helped by Raju. And then she takes up from there. She just goes from strength to strength, and begins to enjoy both her freedom and prosperity. So that's the first time she realizes her potential and enjoys her freedom. And the second time is when Raju cheats her. And when Raju is taken to jail and imprisoned for 2 years, Raju thought that Rosie would just collapse and that she would be back on the streets and that she will not be able to carry on as a performer. But Rosie proves everybody wrong, and she carries on performing shows and making a name for herself, this time with the help of Money, who becomes her secretary. And that's how, in the end, Rosie finds complete freedom and a full realization of her potential when she breaks away even from Raju. So first, she finds her freedom and realizes her potential as a dancer when she breaks away from Marco, and a second time when she breaks away from Raju. And both of whom, as I said, represent very patriarchal, very stereotypical, and very oppressive views about women. And Rosie suffers from their behavior and treatment at various stages in the text. So in the end, Rosie finds her freedom and she survives. Not only she survives, she also thrives. And that's a happy development in the text. If something good happens to a character in the novel, it is to Rosie that she finds her freedom and she finds her happiness, and she sets an example for others, other women, as to how they can survive away from the patriarchal structures and patriarchal restraints just on the strength of their own character and talents. The third question is, what is the feminist critique of patriarchy in the text? So the feminist critique involves all of the points that we have discussed, that men tend to think that women should remain dependent on them, that women cannot do anything on their own, that women are better kept in the house and treated as housewives and not allowed any freedom or never asked what they would like to do in life. And that's the best place for women to be, under a man and in man's care, and most of the time doing house chores. Now, Marco expects that from her, and Raju expects a kind of a dependence from this woman on whom he was in fact depending for his money and for his fun and for his lavishness. So that is a critique, that the patriarchal society, the patriarchal mindsets don't allow women any freedom to realize their potential, their talents, and to live the life the way they want. And therefore, patriarchy doesn't allow women to find true happiness in life by deciding what it is to be a woman and how a woman should be happy in society. So when men decide for women, they are certainly not going to understand what a woman really wants. And because they don't really understand, they are going to impose things on her that she really does not like and does not find helpful. So that's a big critique. But the other thing is that it also critiques a society that that doesn't allow women freedom all the time. It was Rosie who had to find her freedom and had to finally, it was circumstances that even took Raju out of her life. Otherwise, she would have just put up with all the tantrums of Raju and put up with the kind of exploitation he was making of her. And then she would have continued that way. So in the end, we see feminism winning, a woman's freedom winning, and a woman's independence becoming successful in the end. So it's a good critique and a good feminist perspective, presented not now, but in 1958, 56 by Narayan. So that's the value of it. Today we'll say, so what? This is what happens. This is how it should be, and what's new about it. But please remember that Narayan wrote this text in 1950s, and feminism has grown a lot after 1970s. So Narayan was a man ahead of his time, and especially as an Indian writer, it's a big contribution. Okay, now a question for you, a question for all of you. Anyone can speak. What do you think should have happened in the end to Raju? What happened? What should be a proper end to the novel? Because it is ambiguous. It's not told clearly whether the rains arrived and Raju lived, or rains did not arrive and Raju died, or rains arrived and Raju died, or Raju lived and rain did not arrive. So, what do you think? How should the novel end and why?
So, Father,
Yes.
yeah, according to my thinking, I say that maybe the rains had arrived.
Hmm.
Rains arrived because he prayed for the villagers.
Hmm. Okay. So Bharat says that a proper ending to the novel is that because Raju fasted for 14 days and he saw the rain clouds, so rain arrived. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. It's my
Okay.
thinking that maybe rains have arrived because he not only fasted but he also prayed for the villagers to get the rain.
Fine. Yes. Okay. So that's a happy ending. Somnath and then Shyam.
Yes, thank you, Father. I think that the arrival of the rain and with it the death of Raju would be a proper ending, and that would
Hmm.
mean a spiritual deliverance of Raju also, and
Hmm.
his success as a saint in bringing the rain and finally getting delivered.
So you think that a proper ending is that the rains arrived, but Raju died.
Yes, Father, that's what I think.
Okay. So did the rains wash away his sins, giving him
Could be,
liberation?
could be, yes, Father, that is what I think. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Shyam.
Thank you so much, Father.
Hello, Father. Hope I'm audible, first of all.
Pardon me?
Hopefully, I'm audible, first of all.
You are, yes.
Yeah, so I think, I mean, as per my own opinion, the proper end should have been Raju should have been lived and Rains should not have arrived. And I have probably one or a couple of reasons for this. I mean, yeah, look, it's good that he kind of was reflective in the end and wanted to change. But I mean, what happened is happened. No one can change it, and he was eventually a fraud. And he even didn't want it to be a saint. It's just the blind faith of people turned
Hmm.
him to it, turned him to insane. So I think Raju should have lived and should have suffered for his sins. I mean, not by any punishment, just but by himself. That I mean, how cruel I was to people that even after praying, the rain didn't arrive. Kind of.
Okay, that's another perspective and a good one. So that's the beauty of this text that you are allowed to have these different perspectives on it. Yes, Dwani Gupta, did you want to say something?
Yeah, hello, sir.
Yes, Dwani, go on.
I think by the end,
Hmm.
he was really in a frenzy.
Hmm.
So there's a tough chance that rain actually arrived.
Hmm.
Maybe it's something. Maybe it's something that he liked. That's something that he felt that he liked,
Hmm.
in his conscience and stuff. So, and I think that he died after that because, it's a really dramatic thing, but I've noticed
Hmm.
that
Hmm.
just before dying, people usually tend to experience or hope to experience the
Hmm.
things that they like the most about their
Hmm.
time,
Hmm.
when they were alive. So I think
Hmm.
he died, and the rain thing probably did not happen.
Okay, so you think it was just an illusion that he saw rains on the horizon?
Yes, I think so.
Okay,
Yeah.
and he died. So that would be a sad ending. It would also suggest that he did not achieve or attain any spiritual liberation nor awakening, and that he just died a kind of a fraud that he was.
Maybe, but I think in a way that ending that he felt those rains, they were somehow significant to him. I think that's up to the reader's imagination.
But
But
yes, we do not know
yeah,
whether they
we
were
do not
really
know.
rain
Yeah,
clouds or because he was hallucinating. So we do
yeah.
not know. Okay. Last word from Nandini, because I have a class at 6:30 and I got to give you those instructions. Nandini, you need to say something.
Yes, Father. So
Yeah,
I
please.
wanted to add that it is really, for me, I feel like it's important that Raju did not actually cause any rains to happen, and it was just a hallucination, because
Hmm.
then it would have caused the villagers to get disillusioned from all
Hmm.
the lies that he had
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
said to them. So it would be kind of like an
Hmm.
not so happy but happy ending.
Okay, so the proper ending for you is that Raju is exposed and no
Yes.
miracle takes place because he was not a Swami and because he was not praying genuinely. Is that what you're
Yes.
saying?
Yes.
Okay, but in the end, he lost his life because of the kind of disguise and deceit that he was practicing, right?
Yes, Father.
Okay,
Yes.
so Raju died, and the villagers were liberated, but liberated not from the drought, but from the deception. Correct?
Yes, Father.
Okay, fine, fine. I need to stop here the recording first, and then I'll give you the other.